Why do we do that every time? It's like as soon as we know we're live, I look over at Zoe and we give each other these eyes and we cannot help but laugh. I'm sorry, it's happened every single time so far.
We have like the best chats off air, and then as soon as it's like we're recording, it's like,
how do we talk again?
Yeah.
Shall we start with a breath?
Yeah. So as we do in every episode, let's just settle into this space or wherever it is that you are. So eyes can be open or closed, and just take a nice slow breath in through your nose and a gentle breath out of your nose. And just notice the difference, if there is any, of course.
There usually always is, even after just one. So thank you, my love. Before we start this episode, as a very passionate Warramungu Yari woman, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of the land we are recording this podcast from, and honour their ongoing connection to country, community and culture. I wouldn't be me without the sacrifices of my ancestors, and for that I pay my deepest respect and extend that respect with love to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and all elders past and present. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Before we get into today's conversation, like all episodes, we are going to start by asking each other, what is it that's keeping you rushing at the moment, Zoe? Because life is always going to keep us rushing every day, every minute, every week.
Well, I hate to admit this one, actually, but it is my dog.
Oh, Nini.
I know. Shout out to Nina. I mean, I don't know if other dog owners identify with this, but I love her so much, but she is a lot and she requires a lot of time and attention. But beyond that, she really adds to the logistics of my life, because some people will know this, but I live down the coast on the peninsula. But a lot of my work is in the city. And so I have this constant battle of, where am I? What am I doing with the dog today? Can she come? Like, I don't really want to bring her to the studio because what if she barks? And anyway, she's so fluffy and she's so cute.
She's so cute.
I know, but
I love Nina's personality actually, because it's so funny how dogs have got such different personalities, and Nina's is the sassiest. Like we're in Nina's world.
Yeah, it's Nina's world, we're living in it, but she does not like physical affection at all. So if we are inside, she is outside. We always have this joke where we're like, where's Nina? And we're like, oh, she's outside on reception. The phones have been ringing off the hook today. She hasn't even had a moment for a lunch break because she sits on the doormat at the front door. And then as soon as we go outside, she comes inside. I'm like, I love you so much. I care for you. I walk you. I feed you. I buy you toys.
I pick up your shit.
I literally pick up your shit. And when I ask for just the smallest moment of affection, you look at me as if I am a psychopath. But that's okay because she's running her own race, and we love her no matter her mood.
We love fluffy scruffins.
So that's what's keeping me rushing this week, the logistics of that.
I was not expecting you to say that, but
bit left of field. But anyway, what's keeping you rushing this week?
Well, we're pre-recording these episodes just to preface. So, the reality of that is I am now by the time this comes out, it'll be much closer. But where I am at today is 4.5 weeks away from running the Nike Melbourne Marathon half mara. And I have not been on a single run probably for 6 months.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Shit.
Other than like on a treadmill in a gym, like to warm up. Yep. But yeah, so I'm waking up every day, and every day is another day closer to the event that I haven't done any training for. So firstly, my mind is rushing about that because I'm like, fuck, how am I going to do this?
I feel wildly concerned for you.
Yeah. The thing is, I've done it a couple of times now, so at least I know the course, I know what to expect, I know how I'm going to feel, and I know I can do it.
True.
I'm definitely very underdone and underprepared this time round, but I'm confident that I've got a fitness level enough to be able to do it, but it just means that I have to really commit over the next 4 weeks to run, like really rush towards the finish line with the running now. But I feel as though if I can get over the next 3 weeks 2 solid long runs in, and when I say long run, something over about 15 Ks.
Nice.
And then just get a couple of little runs, the 5 to 8K mark, just to get the legs ticking over. I know I'll be okay because I know what happens. You run that course and you get to about that 14K mark and your legs, well, for me, it's always my hips absolutely are cooked.
It's like after you've gone around the lake, around Albert Park
it's
Lake,
the lake,
and then you finish that up and you're like, fuck, sorry, I'm giving her demons.
Oh my God, actually, I haven't thought about the lake component of the run yet, because you hit 10 Ks at the lake and it's the 10K mark. And if it's a windy day, oh my goodness.
Oh, shocker.
It's hard. But once you come out of the lake, you feel good because you're like, the lake is done, thank goodness. But that's at the point that the body starts to kind of hurt a lot. But fortunately, it's such a buzz. Like, I absolutely froth the day. Like, the Maribyrnong event has grown into something so epic, and the energy, the buzz, the people. I think last year the tickets for this event sold out pretty much like that day.
Yeah,
when they released. So I love that. Like, I just love the energy, and I know that energy will carry me for the remaining 10 Ks of that run.
Well, I will be there doing the 10-kilometer run this year because I opted for something a little gentler, and I will be waiting for you at the finish line, as I was last year, actually. Was that last year or the year before? Anyway, it all blows into one. But yeah, it's such a great event. I'm really excited for that. But yeah, I really feel for you and your hips.
Here we go.
So as Megzy mentioned, today we are talking a little bit more about mental health and therapy and I guess everything in between. And the context for that is that we are recording in the week of Are You OK Day, which was yesterday. And I also believe that it is or was Women's Mental Health
Week. Yes.
Yeah.
Women's Mental Health Week, sorry.
Yeah. And beyond that, obviously we're just getting started here at Rushing Slowly, and there's so much that you guys don't know about us and how we spend our time and what we do. And obviously a large part of what I do is in the space of mental health, because I am a psychotherapist and I have my own private practice called Loop Wellbeing, where I see clients as a way of really sitting in their adversity with them and helping them to find new paths forwards and new tools and strategies in order to just cope better in the world. So we're going to talk in more detail around what psychotherapy actually is, because if I had $1 for every time I was asked that question, I would not have to work as a therapist. So we'll talk about that. And what else? Are there there are probably some other things we'll get into.
Just mainly debunking therapy, I think, is the key here, because as we know, as I'm sure most of the population is aware, poor mental health is a really serious problem for a lot of people. And it's, everyone experiences different mental health challenges along the way. And there are so many tools out there to help. And I think that sometimes it can almost be so overwhelming, because it's like, where do we go? What tools do we seek? There are so many resources. And yeah, I personally really wanted to have this conversation today for 2 reasons, because I know how many people, particularly as a First Nations person in this country, I know how prevalent mental health issues are for my community, but also for everyone globally. And secondly, because I'm so fascinated, just me personally was so fascinated, still am so fascinated in the work that you do, and, to talk a little bit more about the psychotherapy space. And I know we touched on this briefly in a previous episode where Zoe was explaining, that you are a psychotherapist. And I, again, just to reiterate that conversation, I remember when you and I met, and I was so intrigued by the work that you do, because I hadn't really heard of psychotherapy before. I have been somebody who has seen a psychologist, and highly recommend that for anyone navigating a noisy mind or high stress, high anxiety, any of those, depression. Therapy is so important. And for me, I've always gone down the psychology path, and my sister's a psychologist.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Cool.
My sister's a psychologist. And my mum works in the domestic violence women's space. Like it's very embedded in my family. And the thing was, though, when you started talking, I was like so intrigued, because I was like, oh, there's this whole other realm. And on top of that, there's so many more. But yeah, it was really fascinating to me to know that there were other options out there. And when you actually explained psychotherapy, I was like, oh, actually, that sounds like more like what I personally need, because of the method that you particularly undertake in your practice. So I guess, Zoe, actually, to kick things off.
Before you ask that question, I also think it's important to reference the link, and this is maybe more of a personal thing for me, the link between rushing and my mental health. Like for me, the more that I am rushing and running and grasping, the more likely I am to have an incredibly noisy mind, a dysregulated nervous system. And so I think that that's also, another reason why it's important to talk about the topic of mental health as it relates to learning how to rush a little slower.
All right, well, perfect segue. Zoe, what is psychotherapy? Can you share that? And then, give yourself a plug. Loop Wellbeing. What do you do at Loop?
Yeah. So there's so much to say. So firstly, psychotherapy can be a really charged word, and interestingly, it's actually been a word that I have steered away from when I'm kind of marketing my work and my practice, because the feedback that I've had is that it sounds really scary, because we were just talking about this off air, this idea like psycho. It sounds like you have to be a psycho or something to receive therapy, but actually that's totally not what it means at all. So psychotherapy can mean different things to different people. So I want to be really clear that this is just my interpretation. But psychotherapy is therapy for the mind. So if we kind of break down the words, psyche is the mind, and therapy. So therapy for the mind, therapy for the soul, some people would say. Psychology, first and foremost, is a study and a science. So if we break down the word psychology, psych, mindology is the study of. So psychology is, as I said, first and foremost a science. It's the study of the mind, and then applying certain therapeutic strategies such as cognitive behavioral therapy or schema therapy or acceptance and commitment therapy, which are all forms of psychotherapy. So psychotherapy is the application, the practice. Does that make sense? Because I know that it can feel a little bit strange. Yep. So psychology as a field, I guess, developed from research, from an desire to understand the human mind, whereas psychotherapy developed in a completely different context, and it was more oriented around working with trauma and traumatic experiences. I won't go into the history, but for anyone who cares, you can look up Sigmund Freud, who I think around the mid maybe 1800s or something developed psychoanalytic therapy, which was in response to the cultural times and the trauma, the collective trauma that people were experiencing.
Just to interject, Zoe, before you keep going, I remember when we first had this conversation, and I was super intrigued about your work. And going back to what you said, I was, the word psycho, I was like, whoa, like tell me more. But as soon as you started to tell me about the link between psychotherapy and trauma and how it's very much aligned with almost like inner child stuff and like very much about the soul and the spirit and working with that kind of thing, I was like, this is my language, this is my jam.
Yeah, which I want to be, I guess, really clear in that is not necessarily specific just to psychotherapy, but perhaps more specific to the way that I practice psychotherapy. So before we get into that, I often get this question of, well, what should I choose? Do I go to a psychologist? Do I go to a psychotherapist? Like, what actually is the difference? And again, that's a really hard question to answer, because psychotherapy means different things to different people. There are many psychologists out there who call themselves psychotherapists, rightly so, because the practice is often using psychotherapeutic techniques. There are some psychologists out there who call themselves clinical psychologists or counseling psychologists, and it's so confusing because there are all of these different labels which are sort of pointing back to a really similar thing.
Which I think is why it can be so overwhelming
Totally.
and why it almost sometimes deters. It certainly did me. I was like, far out. I don't know what option to go here. Like,
Yeah, and so to answer the question of, well, what do I choose? What do I need? There is no right way. A psychotherapist is not better than a psychologist. A psychologist is not better than a counselor, right? It really, really depends. But the thing that is most important to note is that regardless of the label that a practitioner might identify as, such as a psychotherapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, the thing that is the most important and that research suggests is the greatest contributor to change is the relationship itself. So the fit between the client or patient and the practitioner. So where do I go and what do I need? Well, the most important thing that people should be looking for is a person that they resonate with, that they vibe with, that they feel safe with, and that they feel as though they can develop a really trusting relationship alongside. Because research suggests that the greatest contributor to change, to therapeutic change, is not the model of therapy, the type of practitioner or the type of therapy that they're practicing. It's the relationship.
well, I really resonate with that because I remember the first psychologist that I ever saw, and she was a lovely lady, but I felt that I couldn't fully open up in that environment because I actually didn't enjoy the setting in which she delivered her practice, or her practice didn't feel like somewhere that was warm and welcoming and helped me feel calm. Like, it was not conducive to the erratic internal dialogue that I was experiencing in that moment. And that was a big part for me. Like, I love greenery and I like calmness and candles and flowers. And this is so particular to me. But then I walked into a space where it was colourful and there was art on the wall and there were flowers and there were books in there, versus walking into pretty much a white room with a couch and a couple of fluffy cushions. That just didn't suit me. And then it was the second time around that I was like, oh, this feels way more me. And immediately, just even walking into the room, I felt safer to be able to, open up and really, it's obviously, it's obviously a really important part of it. And I think something that, to like a psychologist or a psychotherapist or a counselor or whatever it is that you choose, think of it as almost like a PT. It's the same kind of thing. You might not land with the right PT straight away. Like, I've had clients that in the past where, they've moved on and that's been cool because they needed a different style of training.
Yeah.
And it's the same in this landscape. If it doesn't work for you in the first run, give it another.
Yeah, so finding a person that you like and trust will ultimately deliver you the best results. That really is the message here. And to Megzy's point, therapy or finding a therapist is a lot like dating, actually. And sometimes you got to slay a few dragons until you find your princess. That's what Guy always says to me.
Kiss a few froggies.
Yeah, that's it. And so, it's really important because often people will try therapy once and not vibe with the person, not because it's the person's fault, but just to your point, we all have different preferences and energy and things that we resonate with.
Energy.
It's a massive part of it, because one person might walk into that same colourful office with paintings on the wall and candles and think, oh my God, this is fucking absolutely ill. Like,
100.
And so, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater just because the first therapist that you interact with really doesn't feel like the right fit for you. That just means that you have to go out and try again. And my biggest recommendation on this is, notice how this could become really expensive. It's like, now I'm shopping around for therapists. It's costing me a couple $100 a pop. But try to get the practitioner on the phone before you commit to a first session, because you can tell a lot about a person just by having a quick phone chat. And you don't need to reveal all your deepest, darkest secrets on the phone. It's not about that. It's just by saying, hey, this is where I'm at. Do you think this is something that you can help me with? And not only are you listening to what the person's saying, but you're listening to how you're feeling as they're talking back to you.
I love
And
that.
that's really important. And that's why I offer to all of my clients or potential clients a 15-minute call, because it's also in my best interest to not take on a client that doesn't feel like an energetic fit, because I don't want to waste that person's time if I'm not the right therapist for them. And I'm really not the right therapist for everyone. And that's really okay. So it's beneficial for both parties, actually, just to have a quick call and to just make sure that it feels aligned. And to be fair, you might also get 3-4 sessions in and then think to yourself, oh, I kind of thought that this was right, but I'm starting to feel as though this might not be quite right. And that's really okay too. I guess the flag to watch out for there, is it that it's the therapist, or is it that I'm starting to get a little close to someone and that feels scary? And that's sort of something that is really important to differentiate internally, because you might notice a pattern, right, where every therapist you try, you get 3 or 4 sessions in and think, I don't know if this is quite right. And, if that were true for you, then I'd really be encouraging you to think, oh, is it the therapist, or is this something in me that feels a little scary to start to get more vulnerable? Because that's really, really common. That's so, so common. So yeah, if you notice that in yourself, please know that you're not alone in that. Most people experience that in some way.
Well, it's like interesting, listening to your gut and your instinct
Totally.
and tuning into that and knowing that really is a very great guide. I want to go back to something that you talked about in terms of the cost and expensiveness. But yeah, what is the cost? And is that something that you notice is a barrier for people?
Yeah, this is such an important one, and it's a conversation that I have all the time on these little phone chats because people are interested. Obviously, the reality is not only just therapy, the commitment of therapy costs money, but it also costs time, and that's really precious. So yeah, this is a really common conversation. And I think that we should also come back to actually differentiating between all the different practitioners. We've got counselors, psychotherapists, psychologists, and psychiatrists. So let's come back to that in a second, and I'll just quickly differentiate the difference. But for most people, they're making the decision whether they go with a psychologist or a psychotherapist as it relates to therapy. And right now, under the Australian Medicare scheme, psychotherapy is not recognised. It's still considered an alternative therapy, I believe, which means that you cannot claim the mental health care rebate through Medicare for psychotherapy sessions. I've heard whispers on the grapevine that that's going to change at some point, and I really, really hope it does, because wouldn't that just provide more access? So if you do decide to see a psychologist, then typically you would be able to receive a rebate from Medicare. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but at the moment I also believe it's about 10 sessions per year that one would be reimbursed through Medicare. And that's brilliant, obviously. But the cost of a psychologist, typically speaking, there are massive variations to this, so we'll keep it general, but the cost of a psychologist typically for an appointment, which is always 50 minutes, usually 50 minutes in length, would be about $220 to $250.
Oh, wow.
Then you would receive a rebate of X amount of money, and you'd be out of pocket, let's say $100. A psychotherapist, typically speaking, keeping this general, is probably for a 50-minute session, anywhere between kind of 120 to 180, right, on the very top end of the spectrum in what I've seen in my community anyway. So let's call it $150. And so whilst there's no Medicare rebate, so that entire $150 is out of pocket, the difference is that it's not capped by 10 sessions. So in my experience, to experience change, we're looking at least kind of 12 sessions, really, to be able to really feel and recognize noticeable change. And of course, that's just the beginning, right? We want to be able to really build on that. And so what happens is that most people get the mental health care plan, they have 10 sessions of therapy, maybe they see their psychologist once a month. And whilst I'm not suggesting that that's not helpful, it is helpful, and I think that everyone should do it if that's where you're at and what you need. But once those 10 sessions are expired, if you want to keep doing the deep work, then all of a sudden you're out of pocket potentially $250 a session.
Yeah, right.
Research suggests that weekly therapy, this is obvious, and I know that people know this, and I always say this in a really collaborative frame with my clients, because we have to work with the reality of your life and your finances. But weekly therapy is always going to be the most effective. Research suggests that weekly therapy will end up being cheaper in the long run, because of course you get to where you want to go to faster, because we build a therapeutic rhythm, your nervous system settles into the relationship, we reach a level of depth in a way that monthly therapy, for example, couldn't or doesn't always. Fortnightly therapy really is on the cusp of therapeutic change. So I do see some clients fortnightly, and that's fine.
I was going to ask, what's sort of what are you noticing as a trend within your practice?
Yeah, well, the clients that I work with weekly, no doubt we just build this rhythm that, it just change happens faster.
Yeah.
Change happens faster. Our relationships feel way deeper. The clients that I see weekly, there's no doubt we have a real resonance. So with those clients that I'm seeing weekly and building this really loving, trusting relationship with every week, you can see why that would then tip into greater therapeutic change.
Yeah.
However, the reality is that it costs time and money, and it's not possible for everyone. And I do see, and to be clear, I also see clients monthly, and sometimes old clients drop in every quarter, right? And that's totally fine. Everyone is welcome in my practice.
And just to draw a comparison that's a little outside of therapy, but what just hearing you say that reminded me of something that I've been doing. Two things, actually. I've been working with a health coach, as I mentioned previously in a previous episode, and we see each other once a week. And at the moment we're up to our 12th week.
Great.
And it's different. We're not having therapy sessions. We're talking about my health and talking about food and my digestion and all of that sort of stuff. But it's the accountability.
Yeah.
And honestly, after seeing her weekly, it's like, I know I'm having this call with Christina, and I know we're going to be talking about this, and it's keeping me accountable for the next time we talk.
Yeah.
So just to draw a parallel there, but then also I've just started working with my life coach again to help me with some
Are you
of my
doing
business.
both at the same time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, to help me with some of my business stuff. So I had a call with Yolanda yesterday. However, we're not catching up weekly. Ours are separated monthly. But just that accountability, the consistency, like I've scheduled in 6 sessions off the bat with Yolanda because I know I'm not going to get what I need out of just one.
Yeah. And I want to be really clear that like there's a level of obviousness to that, like of course. And I know that most people would actually want to see their therapist weekly. And I know that it's really like even me, right? I'm seeing my therapist fortnitly at the moment. And
I wanted to ask you about your own therapy practice because we've talked a lot about sometimes, when you pour all of your time into your work as a therapist, but do you actually have your own therapy practice?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Of course. I have a therapist. And actually, if it's okay, I want to come back to that because I think that's really important. It'll tie back into something that's on my mind. But before we go there, let's just really briefly touch on the difference between a counselor, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and a psychotherapist, okay? And I think that your question will be answered as a part of this too. So let's start with counselling, and this might be actually similar for coaching too. I imagine that many coaches out there have counselling skills. I don't know what someone studies to become a coach, if you study at all, but counselling really is more short-term and specific as opposed to psychotherapy, which is more long-term and deep, right? So counselling often orients around a fairly singular problem, and so therefore I come and I present this problem and we work through it and resolve the problem, ideally. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense, yeah.
A psychotherapist, compared to a counsellor, will usually undergo more vigorous training, right? Most or all psychotherapists will study counselling skills, but not all counsellors go on to study psychotherapy, right? So you can get a counselling diploma, I believe, in maybe like a year or 2 years. So less study involved and more solution-focused work. Again, I want to be really clear that I'm speaking generally here. I know that there are variations to this, and I really don't want to step on anyone's toes, but in the interest of time, we're going to keep this general and simple. Okay, so let's move on to a psychiatrist, which would be on the opposite end of the spectrum. So a psychiatrist is an extensively trained medical doctor who is licensed to diagnose, treat, and prevent mental illness, often through prescribing medication.
Psychiatrist.
A psychiatrist.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so a psychiatrist can prescribe medication. It's really important. Yeah, so I've already sort of touched on the difference between a psychologist and a psychotherapist, but I think something important to name is the different study pathway. So a typical psychology training in Australia focuses on mental health skills, particularly cognitive behavioural therapy, which remembering is a kind of psychotherapy, but it generally approaches therapy through, I guess, a medicalised lens. So psychologists, as I mentioned, are recognised under Medicare and can both diagnose and accept mental health care plans, right? So a psychologist would typically be referencing the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual, which means that when someone comes and they're presenting with mental health issues, they would potentially receive a mental health diagnosis, right? a psychotherapist would not be diagnosing. A psychotherapist is not allowed to diagnose. And one of the reasons for that is that a psychotherapist undergoes a different type of training. Now, keeping in mind, this is general because, of course, there are psychologists out there who are practicing psychotherapy because they've gone on to do their clinical placements and additional studies. But when we're talking about just a psychotherapy bachelor's degree, which is what I have, or some people out there go and do their psychotherapy masters in counselling and psychotherapy, but it's different. And so as a minimum, a psychotherapist will have an undergraduate degree plus extensive specialised training in psychotherapy. But this is the part that I think is the most important. Most psychotherapists will undergo a period of their own personal therapy to ensure that they have sufficient self-awareness and self-experience.
I love that.
Right? And that is often the difference. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that impacts my practice. But psychotherapists really tend to avoid categorization, but instead really seek to understand the mind and the context of their clients from both a developmental but also sometimes a philosophical lens. And notice how that's just a slightly different foundation than a psychologist who really undergoes medicalized training that is oriented around research and statistics. So another really simplified way is that a psychotherapy training, not always, is oriented around relationships, whereas a psychology training is oriented around studying the human mind, researching the resources and the tools. And that's not to say that psychotherapy is not also research-based, because of course it is. It leverages off the research of psychology, but the training specifically for psychotherapy, and this is where I'll talk a little bit about my own training, really is based off relationships. So as a part of my own studies, to answer your question around do I receive my own therapy, like really my degree was 3 years of my own therapy. It was
Shit, that would have been heavy.
It was heavy. And actually something interesting around how I ended up, I can't remember if I spoke about this already. I don't think I did, how I ended up in psychotherapy. So I was teaching yoga for a number of years and sort of had this inkling that I wanted to do more. And a really good friend of mine, I'd caught up for coffee. She'd come to a yoga class. We hadn't seen each other in ages. And she was telling me that she'd been studying this psychotherapy bachelor degree. And you know when something just sticks with you? And I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And I was like, oh my goodness. And so I was on a holiday in Japan with Guy, my husband, and I was thinking to myself, like, fuck, I think that there's something in this for me. I think I want to look into this. And I thought, okay, I want a sign from the universe. And the first thing that came into my mind was butterfly. I was like, all right, butterfly can be my sign. And I shit you not, Megzy, we were walking through the streets of, I can't remember if it was Tokyo or Osaka, but we were swarmed with butterflies.
I just got goosebumps.
And we had, I think that we'd found ourselves in a fucking butterfly sanctuary or something. Like it was unbelievable. There were white butterflies everywhere. And I was like, okay.
Thank you, universe.
Looks like I'm about to study psychotherapy. But the part where the story kind of takes a little bit of a turn, and I know that you've mentioned your dad already, but actually whilst I was on that trip in Japan was the same time that my dad passed away. My dad was in a car accident, and that was obviously incredibly unexpected and a really traumatic time. But because my dad was my favorite person and my life mentor and the person that I would run these big decisions by, such as studying a degree in my mid-20s, it was the one decision that I didn't get to run by him. And so for me to make the decision to study psychotherapy felt like the first decision that I'd really truly made on my own. And of course I had the support of my mum, who was actually really, really encouraging and of course said what I knew is true, which was that Dad would just want me to follow what I thought was right for myself. And so I did that and I decided to do it, and I was gearing up to both study and work full time because I thought if I'm doing this, I'm also not putting all I've built in terms of my yoga career on hold. I'm going to do both. And so I went into the uni, which was in the Melbourne CBD. I had 2 or 3 weeks on campus. And then all of a sudden there was this strange virus which shut down the whole world. And I ended up studying for 2 years during COVID lockdowns and actually not working at all. So blessing from the universe, I was about to be so chaotically rushed and burnt out studying and working. And instead the world went into lockdown and I got a bachelor degree. So it all really, really aligned for me. But that process, that 3-year degree, was really 3 years of my own therapy. learning so much about my context and my history and understanding myself more deeply and my traumas and my grief, and of course going through the loss of my dad during this same time. It was a lot.
Far out. I have so many things that I want to say off the back of all of that. First thing is thank you for sharing that. That's the first time that we've talked about your dad so far on this podcast, and it's a big thing that we've bonded over, actually, the loss of our pillars of strength and our great men in our lives, our dads, and grief will be a topic that we'll tackle down the track for sure. But firstly, I just want to say how proud he would be of you. He would just be looking down at you and thinking, that's my girl. She's a boss. I'm so proud of her. You're just a powerhouse. You're a weapon. But then also the importance, like going back to the doing your own therapy and understanding yourself deeply and growing a really robust self-awareness in order to be able to then help other people is so important. And I had to do not nowhere near the depths. You've also done the same thing with your breathwork as well. But the breathwork facilitator course I undertook was a trauma-informed breathwork facilitation course. And the first 6 weeks of that is the same. You have to have worked on yourself pretty deeply, I believe anyway, if you are going to then embark on delivering sessions and being a guide for other people. So universal, and then the butterflies and just the universe, like far out. What a story. You've never told me that, and I've had goosebumps from head to toe when you were explaining that special sign. Far out, how incredible is that? And now look, 3-4 years down the track, here you are working in a space that's really, really helping other people to feel better in themselves and in their bodies and in their minds.
Yeah, I mean it's a helpful time to be a therapist.
Yeah.
I mean, especially in a post-COVID world and the impact of that. It's a privilege and I don't take it lightly. But maybe I'll talk a little bit more about the way that I practice. And I guess the reason why I share my experience of studying to become a therapist and being in my own therapy is because that really sets up my instrument as a therapist, because my tool, in the same way that a carpenter would go out and use his hammer, saw, or something, my instrument is both my mind and my body, because my job really is to sit down in spaces with people and attune to them and help to get as close to their inner world as I can using the instrument of my mind and my body. And I think that would be a very, very hard task if I wasn't already, or if I hadn't been in the other chair, if I hadn't done that work myself and had the attunement of my own therapist. And that's kind of the experience that I get when I have these calls with people who are exploring whether they want to go down the road of psychotherapy or just therapy in general, is that people are really looking for that. I think they're looking not just to be told what they should do or to be given tools, but actually to feel attuned to, like to actually feel connected with someone. And that is why my number one priority with all of my clients is focusing on building a relationship, which is based on, first and foremost, trust, safety, kindness. Like, whatever you bring to me, I will welcome you with open arms, always, unconditionally. But the other really important part that always tends to prick people's attention when I talk to them about how I work is collaboration. So many people enter into the therapeutic relationship or a client-practitioner relationship thinking that the therapist has the answers and has the power because they're the expert. But I always reverse that and say, well, actually, no, you're the expert in you because you're living in your mind and body every day. I have some expertise in therapy and in mental health, and so it's actually about us collaborating together on a shared project. I'm not above you. You're certainly not below me. It's about us being equals here. And it's that experience that I think is really refreshing and different to people. And I feel so lucky to have been not only taught that is the most effective way to practice therapy through my training and through my mentors, but also to have had that experience myself, to have been in a collaborative relationship with my own therapist and notice how refreshing that is, to not have to give away my power or my own autonomy or, like I often do know what's best for me, actually. I just need help finding it sometimes. And so on your part, because I know that this was what you touched on earlier and the part that really sparked your curiosity when we first met each other and you asked me about psychotherapy, is that I also take a really developmental approach to therapy, which means that I'm most curious about pattern recognition. And so with all of my clients in the first couple of sessions, I do my best to take to understand the landscape of their whole life. So where they've come from, the environment they grew up in, the family system in which they exist, their social systems, their existing strengths and resources, because not only is that really, really important, because for us to collaborate on a shared project, I need to understand what the project is, but also because of pattern recognition. So often when we cast our mind back through history, we can see or find patterns that some of them might be in your awareness, but some of them might not be. And when we come to identify a pattern, something that we're continually replaying over and over again, it's like, oh, wow, maybe there's actually a little space to try new ways of being or approaching this problem or way of thinking or way of being.
So I'm really curious in your own practice, and you don't have to answer this if it crosses a boundary, but would love to know if there is a pattern that you notice with the clients that you deal with day to day.
Yeah. So, I get asked this a little bit in terms of patterns, and the answer is kind of yes and no. I think becoming a therapist, what I have come to realize in my short, 2 to 3-ish years of practice is just the variety of experiences out there, and also often the unexpected nature of people's experiences. Sometimes we're so quick to judge people by appearance or judge the book by its cover, but actually when you just take the time to understand where someone's come from, it can be really mind-blowing and shocking. And I don't necessarily have specific patterns per se, but I think that it would be good to talk a little bit about the myths and misconceptions around therapy and why someone should come to therapy versus this really common belief that, oh, my problems aren't big enough to warrant seeking professional help, because that is a massive conversation. And firstly on that, suffering is suffering. If you are suffering internally, no matter how big or small, no matter how big you judge the reason to be, you deserve support. Like, everyone deserves support, and there is no use comparing our suffering. That gets us nowhere. And I think very often what I notice, and maybe this is a pattern, I don't know, maybe it's not, but people believing that just because they grew up with a level of safety and stability and, financial okayness, that all of their needs were met. But actually there is so much more to human development. It's not just about having a roof over our heads and having parents who love us. It's actually about feeling understood and feeling as though people are willing to take the time to understand us, particularly when we don't even understand ourselves because we're young, for example, and don't have the capacity to be able to understand our emotions and whatnot. And so that's something really commonly that I'm speaking to people about. It's like, just because you grew up with a loving, stable family, it doesn't mean that you also didn't experience moments of loneliness. Just because you're sitting next to someone, it doesn't mean that you can't feel lonely, right? Loneliness is a feeling. It's not representative of physical people in your space.
And it's also, I think, related to experiences that people have in life, right? Like, you might have grown up in a loving home and, had a roof over your head, but life can present you with some serious challenges along the way. And you may have experienced trauma somewhere or been in a relationship that was maybe unhealthy or abusive or toxic, or been bullied, or there's so many examples of experiences that happen in this human existence.
And my favorite part of therapy is when someone for the first time has the courage to look back over the history of their life, and those moments where it's like, oh, that's why I'm like that.
Yeah.
Or, oh, that's where I learnt that. Like those moments where someone has new context for a really repetitive problem, they are my favorite moments. And that's why I just think for everyone at some point in their life deserves to understand their own story. And that's what therapy is. It's being able to look back at our story and then determine the story that we want to write for the future.
Oh, I love that. And
Yeah.
that rings true to me because I've had that penny drop moment so many times in my world and along the course of my journey and therapy journey and healing journey and seeking all of these different modalities. And, you know, we've talked a lot today about therapy, which I wish that you weren't one of my best mates because I wish you could be my therapist.
I'll be wildly unethical.
Yeah, a bit of a conflict of interest there. But there are other, like I've done a lot of kind of spiritual therapy along the way and seen Reiki practitioners, and kinesiology is one that I've mentioned. Breathwork is a huge way of getting to know yourself deeper and recognizing those little patterns. And there are so many other little ways as well outside of that kind of therapy bracket. But I think the main message is that we are humans that experience a range of different emotions and we're confronted with challenges. We always will be, from being a little kid and the things that go on there to being teenagers and having different parent dynamics and then growing up and relationships. And there is so much. And it is so normal to need help.
Yeah, which was exactly what I was about to say in another kind of myth or something that I notice in people resisting coming to therapy is that something like, if I admit that I need help or I'm not capable of dealing with whatever I've got going on with my own head noise, that means that I'm weak. And it's like, oh, no, it's the opposite actually. Many people will go through their whole lives never having the courage to turn inwards and actually look at that and recognize that they need help to shift some things. And so it is so courageous actually to recognize that I can't handle this one on my own. And in the same way that we outsource, if we're really bad at marketing, I'm going to hire someone to do my marketing. It's like, well, I've been battling with this problem inside of my mind for potentially years. And so actually I'm just going to get someone to help me with it.
But what I do want to acknowledge with that is that I think so many people avoid it because of how scary it is to confront it.
Yeah.
It can be very, 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 very scary to look your flaws and look your traumas in the face and tackle them.
Yeah.
It's fucking hard.
Yeah, which is why I often say, and this is very much a pillar of Loop, which is my therapy practice, is that A, everyone deserves support, but B, it's actually a lot easier to find a therapist and to do the work to recognize that the first one might not be the best one when you're in an okay headspace, when you're actually feeling regulated and well. Because if we wait to find a therapist until we've hit crisis point, it's going to be so much harder because it's not a nice to have then, it's a need to have, which means that we might rush the process, or we might commit to a therapist that's not quite right, or we might avoid it altogether because it just feels way too overwhelming.
Wowza. There is so much in this conversation today. Is there anything final that you want to touch on before we sort of round out?
Well, the last thing I guess is just advice on finding the right therapist. So because I just get asked this all the time. I've harped on about it already. No matter the kind of practitioner, find someone that you really resonate with and that you trust. Remember that therapy is like dating and sometimes it takes a little bit of time. Don't be afraid to get a practitioner on the phone just to sense check their energy and whether it feels like a vibe.
Is there like where do you actually search? Like, do you just type it into Google?
Yeah. So that's important actually. So it's 2024 and the way that people are finding practitioners are changing, right? A lot of my clients actually come to me through Instagram, which can be a little problematic actually because I do share a little bit of my personal life on the internet, and for boundaries' sake, it's really, really important that the therapeutic relationship is a collaborative one. It's two people focusing on just one person. So I have to be really cautious and conscious of kind of making sure that those boundaries stay really clear. Word of mouth is Great. Right. Ask around. And I know that not everyone wants to allude to the fact that they're in therapy, and that's okay because you're welcome to your own privacy. But word of mouth can be really, really helpful. The other thing is just a good old-fashioned Google search, therapists in my area. And I know that that's an unhelpful thing to say. That's what most people will do. But the difference is just having the courage to jump on the phone with someone, because that will potentially help you to weed out a few of the people that you know that you might not want to work with. Psychology Today is a really common resource. I think it's worldwide, or at least it comes from the States, and we have one here in Australia, which is a therapist directory. So you can jump on there, have a look at therapists in your area, of course, read the descriptions and get a sense of whether they're working with the kinds of problems that you're wanting to tackle. What else is there? I think that's all that comes to mind.
And then outside of that, there are also so many amazing orgs and resources and
Of course.
hotlines and places that you can dial. Like 113 Yarn is a mental health crisis line for First Nations people in particular, and it is all First Nations practitioners on the other line, like having an understanding of actually culturally some of the problems that we face as the First Peoples of this country. There are so many resources, and we'll link some in the show notes that we're familiar with. But if you are ever, in crisis, know that there are lifelines and support network. There is so much there to catch you, and that, please never be afraid to reach out. It's so important. Actually, I want to give a little bit of a shout out to one of my very, very gorgeous good friends, Courtney Ugal. She's just done a collaboration with Speak and Share, which is a mental health program, and they run community events in schools and sporting clubs and workplaces. And they've, if you're watching this, you'll see that I'm wearing one of Courtney's pieces. She's collaborated on a hoodie and a jumper, and $5 from every purchase goes to Courtney's business called Wakening. And what she does is all about storytelling and empowering people to share and uplifting people through the power of storytelling, because a problem shared is a problem halved, which is Speak and Share's logo and slogan. So know that there is so much support there, and there are so many people that are really willing to just pull you in and wrap their arms around you. I hope that this episode has just helped to give you some context as to especially the therapy space, like what roads that you can take in order to seek help and support, because it's normal to need help and support, especially in the day and age that we're living in now.
Yeah, and shout out to Courtney, because she's doing some incredible work. And obviously right at the beginning of this episode, we named the time of this recording. It was Are You OK Day yesterday. And whilst it's such an important day and spreads such an important message, every day is an opportunity to check in with our loved ones. It's not always that you have to seek professional support. Sometimes it is enough actually just to confide in the people that you love and trust, and finding the courage to be vulnerable. And, I have no doubt that whoever you are and wherever you are, that there are people who really, really care about you. And so don't be afraid to share your inner world, because isn't it true that we feel more connected to one another when we're open to vulnerability? And you're worthy of receiving care.
I mean, we've covered a lot here, Zoe, and there's so much more that we could say on this, and fortunately we have a podcast now. So we will continue this conversation a lot, because it is something that we both struggle with ourselves, and we're both really passionate about. And the biggest thing for both of us, I know, is what drives us is the desire to really positively influence other people's lives. And I hope that this has helped in some way.
Yeah. And this is an ongoing conversation, right? If you guys have questions about this, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact us, contact me. And we, happy to share more about this as questions arise. So let's shift gears a little bit here, because we like to close off every episode by asking each other what helps us to slow down, which is really important because we all need a little bit of slowness. So we'll start with you, Megzy. What is helping you to slow down?
Oh, gosh. Not much at the moment, to be honest.
At least you're honest.
But I am really fortunate and so fucking grateful to share my home and my world with one of my absolute best mates in the whole world, Portia. We've lived together for the last we've lived together for the last 6 years, but 5 years we just had our 5-year anniversary living in our apartment. And we have been through the ring together, honestly. Like, do not know how we managed to still have things to talk about every day. We come home, we sit on the couch, we talk so much smack. We cook together, we go out together, we're in the same friendship group. We're so lucky. We've literally never had one argument in our whole life. It's insane. I think that
Are you guys really conflict avoidant or?
No, we just have no.
Just checking.
I think we've had little moments where like I've not changed the toilet roll and that pisses her off and stuff like that. But really in the grand scheme of like living and sharing everything, we have really never rubbed each other the wrong way. And
Amazing.
It's very rare, and I consider her one of my soulmates actually. So she helps me to slow down a lot. So that's really something that helps me at the moment, but just it's just been a constant for me. What about you?
Shout out to Portia.
We love Portia.
We love her. What about me? Oh, okay, mine's a little unexpected. A little different.
You're going to hit us with the ninny comment, keeping you rushing.
No,
and
I know. This one's different. It's actually my RoboVac, my robot vacuum. His name is Rob. Robbo the RoboVac.
We love Rob.
We love Rob.
Is Rob new in your life? I didn't know you had a RoboVac.
Nah, Rob isn't new. He's been around for a little while now. And do I regret him? I'm still not sure. I'm trying to figure it out because, well, firstly, to answer the question, Rob helps me slow down because in the time, I like to do a Saturday reset so that I can Sunday relax. And sometimes my Saturdays are busy and I don't have time to do my Saturday reset. And so cue Rob, the RoboVac, because I get him to do my floors. Keep in mind, he mops and vacuums.
Wow.
Yeah, so elite. And I bought him a little while ago because I just thought, you know what, I'm going to try it. And it was a bit of a hit to the back pocket. It was a bit of an investment, but I thought, okay, I'll either hire a cleaner or try the RoboVac. So tried the cleaner, it didn't work out, went for the vac instead. And whilst on the surface level,
it's one of those little round guys?
Yeah, circle, he's white, he's really cute.
Wow.
But so he's good. He does a good surface level clean. He doesn't replace the vacuum, you guys. He doesn't. I still vacuum. I still have to use my proper vacuum at least more than monthly, right? More than monthly. But
wow, that's good. I vacuum like once every week.
It's not bad.
That's epic.
Yeah. I would say I vacuum fortnightly, and then I get Rob to touch up. I'd never mop though. I let Rob do the mopping, but I touch up with the vacuum because I'm quite perfectionist when it comes to a clean house. I like everything to be like quite clean. It's just my preference. I grew up like that. I like things to be clean. Guy's going to be like, sorry, what? Because we have different ideas of what clean is. Anyway, but Rob can sometimes find himself in precarious situations in which I will usually set him and then kind of go out for a walk or do something so I'm not in his way. Love that we've personified him. He's a he. But sometimes I'll come home, aka this Sunday, and Rob had somehow entangled himself in the laundry clothes rack.
Oh no.
So it was neatly folded in and stacked against the wall, and obviously Rob has gone up against the edges of the skirting boards, which he does, and somehow has not only tipped—
He gets up the skirting boards.
Not up the skirting boards, but like, you know, he's got a camera in the front so he knows the boundaries, but he's hit the laundry rack. Obviously it's toppled over and one of the edges have gotten caught on Rob's little top knot. Should we call it?
He's got a man bun.
He's got a man bun. And
he's Rob hot.
And Rob,
he sounds like my kind of guy.
And Rob has dragged the clothes rack across the room until obviously it's gotten too much. And so I get home and Rob is underneath the clothes rack, which is like tangled, that his lid has flipped off a little bit so I can like see his guts. Anyway.
Oh my God, he sounds like he's had a big night.
Yeah, but sometimes he also likes to munch his way down my USB cables, which I
thought you were going to say something else, and I'm like, Robbie's having a good time.
Oh, they assured me when I bought the vacuum that he has charging cord awareness, but that is not true because I have also come home to find him, if for anyone who can see on YouTube here, on a diagonal with the cord that's coming from the USB point in the wall down with it in the vacuum. And so Rob's like this on his two back wheels and has just paused there and then obviously run out of battery.
So
because
is he helping you to slow down, or is he stressing you out?
Oh, it's hit and miss. It depends on the week, because you also have to clean. You have to clean Rob. You got to bath him. So, anyway, but no, he is helpful. As I said, do I regret it? Absolutely not. Would I buy another one once he reaches his expiry date? I'm still not sure yet. But this week, Rob helped me to slow down because he did the whole house front to back after I reset him after the laundry rack incident.
What a guy.
Anyway.
All right. Well, that's
both
all of your rushing and slowly answers were very left of field today. Certainly threw me there, but love that. Glad you've got a Rob in your life.
Yeah.
I'd love a little Rob. I need a Rob in my life. Need a few Robs. Anyway, we digress.
All right.
That's it from us.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. As we said, if you liked this episode, if you have further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Every time that you interact with us on socials or share our stuff is so helpful for us and for our growth, but most importantly, as we continue to build this community. So follow us, subscribe, download all of those good things, and we'll see you in our next episode.
Bye-bye.
See ya. The content discussed in this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If any of the topics we covered today feel overwhelming, we recommend seeking individual support. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, please contact Lifeline on 131114 or 13 Yarn on 139276.